U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs have officially come into effect as of today. Also, by this weekend, the Liberals will have chosen their new leader, meaning we'll soon have a new prime minister. And here to talk about all of this is political columnist Brian Lilley of the Toronto Sun. Brian, welcome. The tariffs are finally here. What does this mean for Canada?
It means a world of hurt if they stick around, if they stay in place for any length of time. Look, if it's short term, if it's only a couple of weeks, then I'm sure that economically we'll figure out a way around it. But 25% tariffs on just about every Canadian export to the United States, other than energy, so that would include electricity and oil, is my understanding. We'll have to, sort out the details on that. Energy's only getting a 10% tariff. This is going to be devastating if these stay in place for any length of time. I've talked to people across various industries, and they're like, well, a 10% tariff, if that's what we were dealing with, well, we could adjust. The dollar's gone down a little bit. That helps. We can eat a little bit of it. You can raise prices just a little bit, and that covers off the 10%. A couple points on the dollar, a couple points eaten by the person selling, and a couple of points of increased price, and you're at 10%. But 25, that's difficult to overcome, and so we are looking at potential shutdown of things like auto plants. A lot of manufacturers across the country. Look, the auto sector is concentrated in Ontario, and it's highly integrated with what we see in Ohio and Detroit and elsewhere, Indiana, places where the Americans make parts and automobiles. We trade parts back and forth. But manufacturing across the country is also deeply integrated with the United States. There are parts of what goes into Red Bull that are developed in British Columbia and shipped down for processing into the Red Bull drink in the United States. And then we bottle it or can it, Red Bull sold in cans, in Canada. Well, the aluminum for those cans comes from Quebec, but we don't make can sheet. That's what you make a can out of. It's the aluminum. It's turned into sheets and then rolled and turned into cans. We don't make the can sheet in Canada, but we make cans in Canada. And so it's a completely integrated economy. This is going to cause massive problems on both sides of the border, but a bigger problem for us. Doesn't matter what the prime minister or any premier tells you, we are going to feel the pain harder than the Americans will.
Wow, and people are just freaking out. And you'd mentioned the 10% tariff on Canadian oil, and most of that is from Alberta. So should Alberta take this as a win, thanks to what Premier Danielle Smith was able to do?
Look, in a trade war, there's no winners, and a 10% tariff is still bad. It's not as bad. So in some ways, yes, but overall, this is just bad for the Alberta economy. It's bad for the Canadian economy. Western Canadian Select, which is what most Canadian oil sold into the United States, that's what it's labeled as. That's what the price is. Generally sells at about an 18 to 20% discount on West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark in North America. In other parts of the world, they use Brent crude. In North America, we use West Texas Intermediate. When you hear the cost, when you hear that oil is at such and such a price, it's West Texas Intermediate. Western Canadian Select, as I said, sells at about an 18 to 20% discount generally. Having 10% added on still makes it more affordable. And that's in part because we don't have pipelines to Tidewater, so we're forced to sell at a discount to the U.S. So it's still going to be something that the Americans will buy, but it will hurt the industry. It will hurt producers. What the impact will be on jobs, we'll have to wait and see. It's not going to be as quick as the auto sector, let's say, where we could see plants on both sides of the border shutting down within a week.
Horrifying, absolutely. Now, Brian, you're in Ontario, and in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford made headlines stateside with a couple of moves. So he's making it so that all American booze is now off the shelf in Ontario liquor stores, and he's threatening to cut off the electricity supply. So can Ford actually do this?
On both accounts, yes.
Okay.
And the American booze is already coming off the shelves. So, in Alberta, you have private liquor stores, but the government is the wholesaler. In
Mhm.
Ontario, the government is the wholesaler for liquor and the retailer. Now we have private beer and wine sales, but not private liquor sales. So, Doug Ford is really pushing that he's taking Kentucky bourbon
Mhm.
off the shelves, along with California wine and Tito's handmade vodka out of Texas. And that is really annoying the
Yeah.
governors and the senators and so on down in the United States. Now, so let's take the example of Kentucky bourbon. Well, the governor is a Democrat. That doesn't help you with Donald Trump. The senior senator is Mitch McConnell, who Trump hates. But Rand Paul is the junior senator from Kentucky. He doesn't like this either. And he's not all in on Trump world, but he's aligned with them on many things, works with them on many things. And he is in the middle of saying the tariffs on Canada don't make sense. This is what we need, whether it's Rand Paul or conservative media commentators like Ben Shapiro. We need Republicans, conservatives in the United States to speak up. So Ontario buys more than $1 billion worth of booze from the Americans every single year. All those future contracts shut down. The current stuff is being taken off the shelves. It'll be warehoused. If they can sell it later on down the road when the tariffs are gone, they will. If not, the government's willing to eat the cost. Nova Scotia is doing the same. British Columbia has said that they will take off alcohol from red states. I don't know if that's because David Eby likes his California Chardonnay or why he's not taking it all off. I don't understand. Ford is asking every premier, every liquor board across the country to do the same thing. On electricity, I have to say, since November 25th, when Donald Trump first proposed this, and when he was talking about Canada being the 51st state, there hasn't been a lot that has broken through in American media until this. Ontario sells electricity to states like New York, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And he said, look, I will cut your electricity and I'll do it with a smile on my face. Now, that's not his opening position, but it is getting noticed. And not just on CNN, where Trump was on TV, or on NBC, where he appeared. American conservative and Republican commentators are noticing this. They're commenting on it. Some are saying, this is why we should just annex Canada and take it over. Others are saying, ooh, this is bad. But at least they're noticing very little of what we've been talking about, threatening in response to the Trump tariffs has broken through until Ford said, let's cut off their electricity. Now, what they're actually going to do is start with a tariff on an export tariff, increasing the price between 10 and 25%. It'll depend on what they charge us, and then they'll go from there. But Ford was just saying earlier today, he'll start it there, but by mid-April, he's willing to just cut it off. And that means they've got to find it elsewhere, which will cost them more because that electricity will not be in the open market anymore.
Do you think this is just a temporary thing, Brian? Do you think this will go on and on?
It's difficult to tell. Look, Donald Trump truly believes in tariffs. The people around him believe in tariffs. They are upping the rhetoric. Howard Lutnick, his commerce secretary, who is a very smart man, very successful man, someone who I've been watching to try and understand what they're doing here. Howard Lutnick went on American television and said, oh, okay, Canada exports so much to us, but they import very little from us. So they need these tariffs. No, outside of oil, it's a very balanced trading relationship.
Yeah.
And even with oil, it's only a $63 billion a year trade deficit. But they are making it out to be so much more. There is a push to say, let's revamp the way the American economy works, get rid of income tax, bring in tariffs to pay for everything. Well, if that's the way it's going to go, that's going to require a complete revamp of our own economy because we've become too reliant on the United States. We are more reliant on exports to the United States than we were on exports to the British Empire at the height of the empire more than a century ago in the Victorian era. So we will have to completely revamp our economy if this sticks around. If they start changing the way that government functions in the United States, if they start gutting income taxes to rely on tariff income, then that means it's not going away. And we're going to have to make decisions on our side, decisions that outside of someone like Pierre Poilievre, I'm not sure most Canadian politicians are ready to contemplate.
Right. Now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded to the tariff situation today, and he's about to be replaced by Mark Carney, but he still came out to address the situation. So what did he have to say, Brian?
Well, on the one hand, he was very strong. He questioned why the United States is attacking Canada while cozying up to Vladimir Putin and Russia. And that's a valid question. Look, I don't buy into everything on the narrative about Putin or Ukraine or what Trump is trying to do on there. I think there's a lot of people trying to push their own ideological or political agenda on that. But saying nice things about Putin while saying horrible things about Canada and launching a trade war makes zero sense to anybody. It's, as I said, even Americans, Rand Paul, Ben Shapiro, et cetera, people are coming out and saying, this doesn't make sense to me. So Trudeau was very strong in saying that we'll stand firm and we'll strike back, but he's not in office very long. He is a lame duck. He's also part of the reason that we're in this mess. The fact that Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump hate each other so much is part of why we are in the crosshairs. There are valid reasons for some of the tariffs on Mexico, very valid reasons for tariffs on China, less so on Canada. Do they have trade irritants with us? Absolutely, just as we do with them. But none of this makes sense. But Trump and Trudeau hate each other. That's where we're at. We will have a new prime minister in a little bit. What will that mean in terms of this relationship? Too difficult to say at this point.
Right. I've been actually hearing that people are directing their anger at the wrong person, that they should be mad at Trudeau, not Trump, about all this whole thing.
Well, look, I think you should be angry at both of them. Justin Trudeau has left our economy in a very bad position. You don't have to take my word for it. Take Mark Carney's word for it. He described the Canadian economy as being very weak, despite the Liberal government saying we're the best in the G7. Mark Carney, in the Liberal leadership debates last week, said Canada's economy is weak. But, as much as we're in this partly because Trudeau and Trump hate each other, these are the actions of Donald Trump. These are the actions of the American president. So, Trudeau can't wear all of this. As much as I am a harsh critic of him, at the end of the day, this comes down to Trump deciding he's going to make these moves.
Okay, so speaking of Trudeau, I guess passing the torch, or so it may be here, Mark Carney will likely become elected Liberal leader this weekend by extension, becoming our prime minister. Does that take place immediately? Is there sort of a handing off period? Is it kind of unclear at this point?
It's funny you ask because Trudeau was asked about that at his news conference on the tariffs, and he said that will be a discussion between himself and whoever wins the Liberal leadership. We're all assuming it's going to be Mark Carney, and that they'll have a discussion on that. One of the things that I've heard lately is that Trudeau may stay on and allow Carney just to focus on an election campaign as Liberal leader. Trudeau stay as PM. I don't know how that would work, but this is, I'm told, part of the discussion in the Prime Minister's office. I'm also hearing an election call by March 16th, so a week after the Liberal leadership. They'll call an election. Voting would happen just after Easter. So Easter is April 20th this year. Easter Monday is technically a stat holiday, according to the federal government. So bureaucrats won't be working. That means you can't hold the election that day. It's got to be April 22nd. So watch for that. I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure, but these are some of the discussions happening in Ottawa. Is Carney just focusing on an election campaign, Trudeau remaining PM, but an election call March 16th for a voting day of April 22nd.
Okay, and then speaking of Carney, Brian, you've obviously been pointing to several examples of him not exactly telling the truth, or in your words, outright lying. So what are some of the problems, in a nutshell, that you've seen with Carney?
Yeah, you're not allowed to say that someone's lying in Parliament. So you'll often see people come up with, oh, he's not familiar with the commandments. meaning that they're not being truthful. Look, Carney has claimed that he helped balance the budget under Paul Martin, which he didn't do. He didn't work for Paul Martin. He didn't join the federal government until 2004 when Martin was PM, and 6 years after he balanced the budget. He's taking credit for Canada's response to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Stephen Harper recently wrote an open letter saying he's taking credit for Jim Flaherty's work, and Jim Flaherty is long past and not around to defend himself. He claimed that Canada sells the United States almost all of their semiconductors, the computer chips that they rely on. We're less than 1% of all sales into the United States. On and on it goes. I mean, it's resulted in people claiming that Carney was a Roman emperor, that he was the first man in space, all these things, because he keeps claiming things claiming credit for things that aren't true. And then when it comes to moving the headquarters of Brookfield Asset Management to New York City from Toronto, he claims he had nothing to do with it, except he did. He voted as chair of the board to make the move. So Mark Carney, he's not really familiar with the truth.
We are out of time here, but Toronto Sun political columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.